And like Matt said, this is a perspective from my comfort zone, from my work experience, which is in the oil and gas midstream sector. And what you see me holding in my hands is the problem we've created is this is our system. This is how we do things. This isn't working. What this equals is millions, literally millions of dollars lost from the contractor workforce side, the owner-operator side, in trying to manage compliance, maintain compliance, and essentially not being on the same page. And that's why I have this visual here. Nobody's been on the same page. Everybody wants to do things their way, and that's fine and that's good, but we're costing ourselves millions and millions of dollars in doing that. And nobody's decided to agree on a standardization of this process or this management. But these applications and what we're talking about as a whole is jumping into the educational field, the medical field in compliance. Let's think back to recent events like Hurricane Harvey right here in Houston. There were literally thousands of people that needed medical help. There were thousands of volunteers that were there to help those in need. And from a medical standpoint, it was chaos, and nobody knew who was compliant, nobody knew who was actually trained, nobody knew who was certified. And we're seeing that in multiple industries as a big problem. What I want to kind of go through is just how to illustrate how much of a problem it is on a day-to-day. And it's from the top down and the bottom up. And what I mean by that is let's take midstream pipeline work. For example, we have owner-operators, big names, Enterprise, Kinder Morgan, Enbridge. These are just examples. This ranges from Dow, Shell, Exxon, you name it. The databases that these companies require your company information and you as a contractor to be vetted through to garner their work, such as ISNetworld, Browse, Veriforce, and there's a multitude of others. This is just 3 examples. Below that, you have your contractor workforce. Folks that want to go out and bid this work. Just a few examples of C2 Pipeline, Strike, Primoris, some large name contractors out there chasing all this work. And finally down below, you have the training institution or training institutions like Veriforce, NCCER, OQSG, where to garner credentials. And this is only a minute sector. We're not even talking about drug and alcohol compliance in this field. We're not talking about background screening and maintenance in this field. This is just literally a tip of an iceberg that's a really large problem. Let's say Strike. Strike wants to grow and be a successful company, and so it behooves them to garner as much work as they can from as many clients as they can. So they want to go to work for Enbridge, okay? So Strike wants to go to work for Enbridge, and that means Strike has to follow Enbridge rules. So just an example, Enbridge likes training and qualifications from Veriforce. So Strike now has to pay and train their people in Veriforce. There has to be a database or a sector for all of that to be verified. Veriforce is somewhat of a hybrid, so Strike has a database subscription of sorts with Veriforce to coincide with their training just to be able to go to work for Enbridge. Not a big deal, at least not yet. The problem is Strike can't only bank as a contractor, as a growing business, they can't only bank on working for Enbridge. They want to work for Enterprise, Kinder Morgan, Shell. They want to work for as many companies as possible. So now Strike says, okay, we want to work for Enterprise. Now that means Strike has to have a ISNetworld subscription because Enterprise doesn't like Veriforce. Enterprise says we want our contractors vetted through ISNetworld. So that's another cost. And then on top of that, Enterprise says, sorry Strike, you trained all these personnel in the Veriforce system, you've got quality people, but we're going to go ahead and say that they're not qualified because we don't like Veriforce. Too bad. And if you want to work for us, you're going to have training through NCCER. And that's just one example. Now you take another client, C2 Pipeline. They want to do the same thing. They want to go to work for as many contractor bid jobs as they can, so they're chasing work for Kinder Morgan Kinder Morgan says you have to train your people through OQSG. Kinder Morgan says we want an IS Networld subscription. You wind up with quite a mess of people just trying to get workers or boots on the job site. And this is waste. It's a waste of time, it's a waste of money, not in a training or qualification sense, but in that we haven't standardized it and we haven't simplified it. Where we run into an even bigger problem and a growing problem is the fact that in this world, these individual workers, they will chase pennies on the dollar. It's common nature. If Matt's company's paying $2 and Billen's company's paying $3, well, I'm going to go work for Billen's company. And the problem is the tracking and what you have to do and the backside information you have to be able to even so much as find out where did these workers get their training, where did it come from, what system is it in, is it compliant with the job site we're fixing to go to. That becomes an extreme hassle. A limited knowledge base of personnel that know how to troubleshoot that, and even if they know how to troubleshoot it, they're not always successful. What companies like Strike or C2 or Primoris wind up doing is saying, forget it, we're just going to retrain them. We're just going to pay to do it. It's the nature of the beast, let's just do it. That's been happening too long. Now the numbers are way too high. It's quite a mess, but it's just the tip of the iceberg. How big this problem really is, I don't think we have enough wall space in here to fully explain it or to fully display it. And that's no joke. What my company does, in a sense of being able to try and help these contractors and get things organized and provide all of these trainings, because we understand that as a contractor, if you want to go to work for BP, you're going to do everything BP says. It doesn't matter if they say wear red tennis shoes on Tuesday, that's what you're going to do as a contractor if you want that job. That's where this industry is begging for a little bit of disruption. That's where this industry is begging for an answer. And I think in meeting Matt and really seeing what MyPass is capable of and what MyPass can offer, we can start to solve a lot of these problems. We can start to streamline a lot of this data cycle. We're looking at millions of dollars lost, and there's a better way. This is completely ineffective the way we're doing it. We need to start communicating with each other in this sector, as opposed to butting heads with one another and saying our program's better, our policies are better, do it our way, not their way. That needs to stop. So that's just a quick take on a tiny sector of a very, very big problem. And there's a lot of players involved, there's a lot of money involved, and it doesn't have to be this difficult. It can be so much simpler.
Also, I look at this from, so what for an owner? Well, if you want the most qualified, most productive, specialized workers on your site, then try not to be hard to do business with. It's really simple. They just want to get in and do the work. You'd be surprised to know a lot of workers don't actually like big delays. They actually do what they do. They have their craft because they like using their hands. They don't like sitting on a chair, and they don't like sitting in a room watching the same induction where 80% of the content's the same. And that's why there's something actually called safety induction fatigue or induction fatigue. Like that's a real thing. And workers will just switch off and you get the opposite effect. So it's not fun. But looking at the first one around industry harmonisation, there's an organisation in Australia called Safer Together. It's an organisation comprised of owners or operators and service providers to the industry. No one else is allowed to sort of join that. And that's been in place for several years now, and it started actually in where Billen was referring to on the east coast of Australia around Curtis Island, where you've got 3 identical LNG plants all built side by side. Eventually they got together and said, we're training people with the exact same information, the same safety baseline applies. Doesn't matter whether you're upstream or on Curtis Island, 80% of that's the same, 20% is different that can be done on site. And so I think this is a really good success story because it's the exact same operators that are working here. It's Shell, it's ConocoPhillips, it's Santos, which is the second largest domestic producer in Australia behind Woodside, and about 150 others have all basically said, let's agree on this. There's nothing proprietary about health and safety. We want everyone to kind of be at the same standard there. And and I'm happy to share this information in the slide deck to those that want to follow these links and have a look, but that is a massive win. And what's happened, which is even better, is that's been mapped across, that was actually a Queensland initiative and is now becoming an initiative across all of Australia. So there was a comment made earlier, why don't operators sort of change and collaborate? It's because the theory sounds great, but it's pretty hard if we had 10 operators represented in this room. Everyone's really happy until they have to change. As long as it's their standard, they're happy, and that's just change management 101. It's not a reflection on the operators, it's just everyone's got certain systems in place to govern their business that constrains them. But there has been some great progress there, and furthermore around common industry competencies. So those are those layers that I was referring to before. One's the basic safety training, but also standard role-based competencies. So for example, working at heights confined space at Classic, where one company might want that to be issued within 2 years, one might want it to be within 3, one might accept up to 5. And you can imagine the confusion, not just from the employer's point of view, but the worker's point of view. It's like, oh, but I can work at that plant just there and have it within 3 years, but you want it within 2 years, and that confusion is inefficiency, and it means workers get stopped at the gate and work doesn't get done. So there actually is a flow-on effect in terms of work not getting done as well, or not having access to the right skilled workers when they're needed. So that's a great step forward now, where for an LNG worker in Australia now, there actually are, and this is thanks to the Workers Safely Together, there are now common competencies where they have standardised. Here are the 2 or 3 unit standards we'll accept for confined space training. So there might be multiple versions of this, but here are the equivalencies, and here's the validity periods, and that's now going to strip a lot of cost out of that training space. The second case study as well here is around supply chain integration, which has really come from that ability to have that single source of truth of worker-owned and controlled data, and this whole explanation that Chris did here can actually be neatly represented now in reality today, with a vertically integrated supply chain with every stakeholder in this chain, from operator to employer to worker to training institution, all working off one data set, of one platform. And I think that's a massive win, the fact that we talk about verifying training as well. We're all exposing ourselves if that's done manually. And even if it's done 5 or 6 times, it's prone to error. If you're drawing that information from the primary source, and this is one example of a partner of ours who's the largest oil and gas training facility in Australia. They do probably about 75% of the oil and gas workforce. Is we've integrated with their system, so that goes straight into a worker's digital passport, which means there's no question, is this valid, does this come from the primary source? So that's great from an assurance point of view. But if you've got someone you want to get on a helicopter to mobilise to a platform on Thursday morning or tomorrow evening, and they're doing their training today, it's kind of useful if that's getting synchronised overnight and everyone can just refresh their dashboards and actually see that. So that's not theory, that's reality today, which we're really proud of, and there's several examples of that where each of these parties have come to this and come to us and said, look, we want to be part of this solution together, rather than this being forced upon them here, which is great. And like I say, just that power of real-time data as well, where workers can, like what I've got, carry around in their pocket everything we've just talked about. So the equivalent of that pile of cards, from a worker's perspective, if they can carry that around with them, and I can present that to you at any stage with verified training and credentials in there linked to a QR code. There's power in that from a safety interaction point of view, from a scanning on before you board a plane or a helicopter or access site. And the technology is there. I mean, the cloud-based technology enables that, provided you've got privacy standards in place and security and permission structures. I think everyone's a bit less scared of the cloud now. That mobility of data is live and real. And actually, I'll just quickly say one more thing. What's also happening here is there's a strong network effect happening now. So UGL, for example, is the largest provider of maintenance services in Australia. They probably service about half the energy facilities. They're a pretty big player. And they're actually rolling out this platform now to their Chevron sites, to their Curtis Island contracts as well. So it actually makes it easy for other players to actually plug into that data. And what we're finding as well is operators like Santos are actually now advocates of the standardisation across industry, because guess what? They benefit the more that come on. So if Shell or Exxon or whoever joins them, then everyone's just plugging into a bigger data set, and you get that sort of flywheel effect. This one here, there's a bit of detail here, so I'll just pull out the highlights, but this is all around some collaboration that's been happening in the oil and gas shutdown and turnaround space, and I'll just pick a couple of things out. I mean, this problem definition we've talked about a lot here, which is, you know, the convoluted nature of gathering compliance documents, the reaction times that are often required, often planning's done last minute, and it's a massive rush to get that information in a timely manner. And you know, probably what people aren't aware of this massive churn. So take that Deer Park scenario. Companies are trying to predict, you know, do companies want 60 welders? Do they want 80? Do they want 30 scaffolders? And it changes by the day. Again, that pain's not necessarily known down the line. I'm seeing nods from the guys that feel this pain every day in the room. It's a really hard gig, and when the planning's not done well, which, you know, universally it's not. Let's just call a spade here. Then that creates this massive fury of reactive nature, and that's when gaps happen. You flip that on its head and say, well, why aren't we proactively managing this? Why don't we have a scenario where workers actually get proactively notified when things are coming up for expiry and they're staying on top of it? And why don't we have a situation where if that worker leaves that site but comes back and they've done training in the meantime, why doesn't that go with the worker? And so all these scenarios are playing out nicely. So this was a collaboration with the Australian government who put some money in to jointly fund some projects. University of Western Australia and Shutdowns Australia and Broad Spectrum, who's one of the major contractors in Australia as well. And the approach taken was comparing some of those traditional methods, which you might not be surprised at involves heavily utilising Microsoft Excel. It's probably the biggest alternative in this space. When you've got databases that don't talk, in comes Microsoft Excel with its infinite number of columns to line up the 127 process steps that it takes to request a worker to that worker turning up on site. And again, those convoluted steps aren't necessarily known when a worker turns up, and it's also not necessarily known how many workers dropped off in that space because they couldn't wait around for.
So Chris and Matt both commented on you know, the bookends of this problem or this issue, but I think it's so broad because it's not just that it's global, but it also cuts across all the industries. And so I spent most of my career in the oil and gas side, so 20 plus years. Have recently moved into alternative energy. It's the same. We have the same problems. You know, so different versions of it. So it's across the energy sector. So the problem is very broad, and the problem is the same. One thing I'll add to your point is that you know, companies spent a lot of time and money on systems to collect data, but the vetting of the data, doing something valuable with that data, that part is where we are now. So from our operational side is how do we work better? How do we operate better with data? Same thing with the workers. You know, how is this data confirming that these people are suitable for the job? These people are qualified. It's doing something with that data, which is challenging. And the other thing too is that we haven't moved away from these clumsy, very manual input-based systems. So I think it's a great opportunity for us too as a company to move in that direction.
Part of the problem I see is because of lack of data to interrogate the supply base, work is overscoped, and so you've got fitters doing work that a skilled assistant or labourer could do. And if you've got more granularity around matching skills to jobs, you can do that. And secondly, I think a lot of mistakes happen when people say, we want a specialist E&I technician as an example. And so they'll scour their database or ask their contractors and they'll look for someone who matches that exact role. But what about all the electricians out there that just need an electrical disconnect or a Cert 4 in instrumentation, and then you've got it. So that whole career pathways is kind of on our roadmap as well, so that we can actually help workers upskill over time. And I think that's where it gets really exciting, because you can start to plug some of these skills gaps rather than reactively saying we want X, and if we don't have X, well then it doesn't exist, and we'll throw our hands up in the air. So when you've got these data sets where you know which workers have which skills and which location, and you add performance data to that's really powerful, and it extends to local content, it extends to diversity. There's a whole range of things that if you get it in one spot, can be really powerful.
You know, we had a situation, I think Matt touched a little bit about inductions and how that information is very common, and you know, people sometimes check out. But if there was a way to simplify that process, you get your people on the job site working, that transfers into the productivity and the efficiency and the value of these projects that we're trying to deliver. But we definitely see that as a benefit.
Thank you for that, because you're all part of the solution too, whether that's something that involves one of us three or not. Hopefully we've stimulated your thoughts there to hopefully play a role in solving it and potentially get together down the track and high-five each other if some of the stuff starts to look a little bit less like spaghetti. Yeah, thanks again.
Thank you.